All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 3:21. I apologize for the delay. As I indicated, I had a technical issue. Today is March 29th. It's Wednesday, I believe. Wednesday, yes. And we have several bills to discuss. And we're going to start with, Matthew, I am going to provide you access as a co-host on this particular meeting. And ladies and gentlemen, all of you have been sent the information relevant to our hearing. And we have 3 bills on our list. We had the bills are, we had, let me let in Delegate Lehman. We have the bills are SB 194, SB 535, and SB 651. We were all sent out information referencing another piece of legislation that we were going to consider, which was HB 1073. We're going to hold on that particular piece of legislation for another time frame. So right now we're going to do SB 194, SB 535, and SB 651. Matthew, if you would start us off, first off, I guess I need to be certain that we that we have a quorum. And if you hold on for a minute, I will take care of that. Delegate Allen is here. Delegate Siliberti is here. I see Delegate Baker is here. I see Delegate Lehman is here. Delegate Boyce is here. And I see Delegate Long is logging in. And I see Delegate Healy as well. Perfect. Oh, where's Delegate Naraki? There he is right there. Thank you, sir. We have perfect attendance. All of you will receive a star from the principal tomorrow. Matthew, if you would start us out, please, by discussing SB 194. I certainly would appreciate it. And you are sharing your screen now.
Mm-hmm. So SB 194, and what you see on the screen right now is a reprint of SB 194 with the amendment 103624-1. Simply put, this amendment puts the Senate bill into the identical posture as the House bill that was passed. The Senate passed the bill favorably. The House had passed the bill with an amendment to clarify some intent language here clarify the intent of the Department of Assessments and Taxations. We've been in contact with the Senate, and I understand the Senate sponsor wants to include that language on the bill. So this amendment would do that.
So thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. In a nutshell, what the Senate is doing is complying with the House bill. Is that correct, Matthew?
Yes, they wish to conform to the House bill. And as a reminder of what the bill does, it enhances notice and billing requirements as applicable when a ground leaseholder brings an action for possession for non-payment of rent or ground rent. A ground leaseholder seeks payment of ground rent, and a ground lease when a ground lease is transferred.
Move the amendments. Is there a second on the amendments, ladies and gentlemen?
Second.
Fantastic. Any discussion on the amendments? Seeing no discussion on the amendments, all in favor of the amendments for SB 194 indicate by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposition to the amendments from Senate Bill 194? Seeing no amendments, I move SB 194 as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on SB 194 as amended? Seeing no discussion, I move SB 194 as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on SB 194? Seeing none, all in favor of SB 194 as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Is there any opposition to SB 194 as amended? Seeing none, it will SB 194 will receive a favorable report as amended to the full committee. Let us now move to SB 65. I'm sorry. Let's move now to SB 535. SB 535. Thank you, Matthew. And if you could give us some information relevant to SB 535 and its amendments, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So Senate Bill 535 is the title is Human Relations, Housing Discrimination, and Service Dogs. The bill would prohibit discriminatory practices in the sale or rental of a dwelling against an individual with a disability who has or obtains a service dog or retains the individual's former service dog after its retirement from service. What you see before you is Senate Bill 535-983-923-1. So it's a reprint of the Senate's language with some additional amendments that were discussed yesterday in the bill hearing. Generally, the amendments here to the Senate bill would alter the definition of service dog to align with provisions in federal law and clarify a certain right established under the bill about maintaining a service dog after it retires through the end of its life. And I can scroll down to what the new definition would be, and that is here. So the language in italics is all recommendations from the House.
And how does this bill as amended relate to the House bill?
So the House bill did not pass prior to the crossover period. So the House bill is currently unamended. If the subcommittee were to choose to make a recommendation, you could also recommend moving the House bill, which is House Bill 608, with a conforming amendment to however the Senate bill comes out after this discussion.
Okay. House Bill 608, as I recall, that Delegate Lehman's bill, is that correct?
Yes.
Delegate Lehman, are you here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to Matt for his hard work on this bill. My office was alerted several weeks ago that Senator Delaney James had added an amendment that we initially thought was requested by the Federation for the Blind. They are the group that brought the bill forward this year and initially approached Delegate Love about doing it. She had a lot on her plate and suggested they come and talk to me. I never really worked with Senator Delaney James at all. They went and sought her sponsorship separately. So we got no real explanation or insight as to why she had offered this narrowing language. It would have applied only to dogs that are trained to support visually impaired and hearing impaired people. And it threw kind of everything into a tizzy. I assumed wrongly that maybe the Federation had asked her to do that. That wasn't the case at all. We never did figure out where she came up with the idea, and it became pretty confusing. But Matt, thank you so much for, working with me and being on the alert for that and when checking in with different parties. And so that if the hearing the other day was a little bit confusing, I think, I could understand why it was, because it sounded confusing even to me. But in the meantime, besides addressing that problematic amendment, which all of the disability groups were opposed to, Matt did a bunch of additional research and looked at these issues around how to define what, I guess the proper term, and Matt, if you could help me with this, some people use the term service dog and guide dog interchangeably, but the proper term is service dog. I believe that comes from is it the ADA, Matt?
So in the ADA, the term is actually service animal. However, service animals are dogs by definition in the ADA. So we just made the term service dog.
Okay, right. And we had been alternately using the term service or guide dog, and it's I guess not one and the same. And then this issue came up over on the Senate side. It was never meant, as far as I know, never meant to include emotional support animals, which are not trained per se. They offer companionship to people and maybe help with issues like anxiety, but they don't go through the kind of training that service dogs go through to actually, physically and otherwise help people with a variety of disabilities. When you think about somebody that's blind with a dog that helps that person to cross a street safely or stand in a proper distance on a subway platform or whatever. But Matt, thank you for all this additional work you did, saying what a service dog is and is not. And then, you heard Senator Delaney James agree that we would get rid of that amendment that the Senate had adopted, saying that this was specific only to these two types of dogs that were trained for blind and visually impaired people.
So I'm trying to narrow the focus here. So it's I want to make sure, Delegate Lehman, that the amendments that are being put onto the Senate bill are something that you are agreeable to. Is that correct, Delegate Lehman?
100%, yes. And I would like to conform the House bill in all of the ways that Mr. Michler is recommending. Absolutely.
We'll do that in a minute, one thing at a time. I just want to make sure we got your take on the Senate bill with the amendments. Okay, so right now, I'd like to see if I can narrow the focus in on the amendments on the Senate bill, and we'll talk about the rest of it right after that. Delegate Allen, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I just wanted to tag on just the very end of what Delegate Lehman was saying. As someone who has experience with, emotional support animals and those kinds of things, the other big difference other than the training with them, and the reason why I don't think this would even apply, they don't have to be retired the same way that service dogs are. They don't have the physical demands, and they don't have that kind of mandatory retirement age that those other dogs do. So that's another distinction. I just wanted to float that out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Delegate Healy?
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the discussion we've had here because the testimony on from Senator Delaney James was confusing to me for a while.
Was to me.
And I'm glad that we're using a definition that makes, that comes from the federal law and that it's clear. And it doesn't cover just blind and deaf people. It covers anyone who needs a service dog, whether it's for a psychiatric issue or not. And I think that was where the confusion was. I never knew what an emotional support animal was. Anyway, I thought it was just another term that they use. So I'm glad that we're putting a real definition into the bill, and it will be very helpful. My nephew has a service dog. He's from the military. He was disabled, and it's part of his being able to get along in the world. So it's very good that we're able to do this. Even when the dog retires, the family will be able to take care of the dog and have that companionship as well.
Thank you, Delegate Healy. And I also want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to Matthew as well. That's why we have the best counsel in the General Assembly, quite frankly. So before us now are the amendments to SB 535. I move the amendments for SB 535. Is there a second?
Second.
Sorry. Yeah, I was to say I'll second it, but I do have a question for Mr. Michler, for Matt.
Fantastic. There's a motion and a proper second. We are now in a discussion period of the amendments. Delegate Lehman, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, I just wanted to make sure, because I can only see what I can see on the screen, and we talked about service dog versus guide dog and what it is and what it's not. Where is can you tell us or show us where the language is struck, or do we not see that amendment that I talked about that Senator Delaney James had added over in the Senate?
So that's right here. If you can see the highlighting I've just done. So as it was amended in the Senate, it would have read a service. First off, there would have been a definition of service dog, which was not in the underlying bill. And the Senate amendment would have been service dog means a dog that is individually trained to assist an individual who is blind or has low vision with navigation or other tasks, or alert an individual with deaf or heart and alert an individual who is deaf or hard of hearing to the presence of people and sounds. That's now been struck, and
I see that. Okay.
The new language would be what you see here and here. Yeah.
Okay. So what it is limited to line 10, to do work or perform tasks. What it is not is Roman numeral 2, numbers 1 and 2.
Yes.
Okay, great. I didn't notice the language you struck under the black lines, but thank you. I just wanted to clarify that was no longer in there. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And I would just note, for the benefit of the subcommittee, these exclusions are actually found in the Code of Federal Regulations, where service dog is defined. It's not just something that was made up. These are actual exclusions, and this is the federal government's statement that emotional support animals are not lumped together in this class.
Thank you, Matt. Delegate Lehman, you good?
Yes, I will just let you all know a heads up. I've already been asked by some disabilities group to revisit next year, maybe emotional support animals. And apparently, Matt, I don't know if you know this, the ADA is taking a look at that issue to figure out how to characterize, how to define them more precisely. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we have the amendment before us now. We've had a motion favorable and a second on the amendments to Senate Bill 535. There's been a motion and a second. Any additional discussion on the amendments? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendments on SB 535, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to the amendments on SB 535? Seeing none, the amendments have been adopted. I move favorable on the bill as on SB 535 as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the bill as amended? Seeing none, all in favor of SB 535 as amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? The bill will receive a favorable report. I would also now, ladies and gentlemen, like to turn our attention to a bill that is not on our list. I'd like to turn our attention to House Bill 608, which is Delegate Lehman's bill. I make a motion to amend House Bill 608 to mirror exactly what we just passed in Senate Bill 535. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Any discussion to amending House Bill 608 to mirror Senate Bill 635? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you very much. House Bill 608 will receive a favorable recommendation from the Housing Real Property Subcommittee. Good job, Mary. I'm sorry, good job, Delegate Lehman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Delegate Ciliberti has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, were we talking about 535 or 635?
Senate Bill
Aye.
535.
Okay, thank you.
Did I misspeak?
Could have been my ears.
Okay. All right. All right. I'm sorry. We will now move to Senate Bill 651. Matthew, can you give us a discussion briefly on Senate Bill 651?
Certainly. So I'm just going to pull the bill up because in this instance, the Senate had passed the bill favorably. This is the Real Estate Brokerage Services and Termination of Residential Real Estate Contracts, the Anthony Mormon Act. The bill would require a real estate broker and escrow agent to distribute trust money to a purchaser if the purchaser terminates a residential real estate contract under the terms of a contingency clause. After written notice of a request to return the money is provided to the holder of the trust money, and the seller is notice is provided to the holder of the trust money and the seller, and specified procedures are satisfied. There is still an opportunity under the bill as drafted for the seller to challenge the release of the trust money. That wouldn't change, and the challenge would then proceed as is the case in existing law. I'm happy to answer any questions. I have a copy of the bill here if anybody would like me to go to a particular part of the bill for discussion.
Are there any?
And there are no amendments that have been offered on the bill from the sponsor or any other group. Let me just verify. Yes, the testimony was either favorable or unfavorable on the bill.
Okay. Therefore, I move favorable on SB 651. Is there a second?
Now, wait a minute. Can we have an opportunity to speak?
Sure. Hang on. Is there a second?
Second,
All right. We are now in discussion period. Any members of the Housing Real Property Committee want to just have questions on Senate Bill 651? All right. Stakeholders. Ms.
Sure. So I have a representative from the Maryland Land Title Association, Susan, that's on the Zoom with us. We, as you know, we testified, or we did written opposition to House Bill, it's Cross Bill 1235, and we also did written opposition to this bill, and we have some concerns, and we also offered some amendments. I don't know if Matt had them in the file.
So Lisa, I did see that there was a suggestion of some amendments from the Maryland Land Title Association. However, those must not have come through because all I saw was the language in the House floor system for the opposition. The amendments were not included.
So can we explain our concerns with the bill then?
Certainly.
Sure. I'll throw it to Susan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to address the members of the committee. And obviously, we work all the time as members of the Maryland Land Title Association with members of the realtors. So our concern here is that we as agents, the title agents that are handling the settlements and often handling the escrow money, are already required to have a written agreement with the buyer and the seller whenever escrow money is sold. So the first amendment that we had proposed was that this law would control unless otherwise agreed to by the parties in a written agreement. And we always have written agreements with the parties. That's required in another part of the law. The other concern that we have is the way contingency is defined. What our concern is there is with our agents being caught in the middle. Well, the buyer says this contingency wasn't met. The seller says, yes, it was met. And then the agent is put in the middle. So we think that that's best addressed by the parties individually in a written agreement. And also we think that the definition of contingency is a little narrow. So those are our main objections with two what we consider fairly minor amendments. We would be okay with this bill's passage.
Any additional, I see Ms. May has her hand raised as a stakeholder. Please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, in regards to the definition of contingency, that was a request that we had last year to narrow the definition of contingency, specifically to those that were more straightforward and more easily determined whether a buyer had properly exercised those or not. So for instance, did the property appraise? Yes or no? Did the septic system pass inspection? Yes or no? Did you receive the condo or HOA docs in the time frame? Yes or no? The other point that we had for this bill, and really why we sought this bill, is because we think right now the escrow holders are caught in the middle when a seller refuses to sign the release. That is what keeps them in the middle of these deposit disputes right now. And so, you know, the seller still has the opportunity to object to the release of the deposit, still has all of their, you know, legal remedies available to them if they believe that the buyer did not do anything. What we're getting rid of is this holding up of the dispute through inaction.
So
Okay.
if I recall the definition going to the contingency, yes, you did make some proposals on how to amend the bill, but because my client MLTA did not agree with that, is one of the reasons why the bill did not move, because while you suggested it, well, that was the definition that's in there now, they still did not agree with that.
Okay,
So it's
For the-
not
for the
new,
mem-
this is not a new concern that we're bringing up.
got you. Matthew.
Just
Yeah.
for the members of the subcommittee, I do have the definition up. And just maybe, if it's okay if I ask one question, is this list here intended as the only types of contingencies that are to be covered by this bill? Because
This language,
contingency is
Go ahead.
drafted. Contingency as drafted means a clause included in a contract of sale for residential real estate that requires a specific event or action to occur. This is what contingency means, and this is what contingency includes.
correct. And I think the language that we had in the prior year bill on line 6 there said contingency means. But for instance, one contingency that we did want to not include in this is financing. Because financing is very tricky. A buyer can lose their financing through no fault of their own, or they can intentionally ruin their credit during the escrow period and lose their financing. And so that was one that we specifically thought didn't fit this definition. Or
I
at
see.
least this process for the return of the deposit.
Matthew,
Like having the something that just says the contingency includes, there, it can be, the definition is broader than simply those things listed.
I agree. And that's why I'm trying to clarify for the subcommittee, if by narrowing how, because this is a non-exhaustive list of examples, whereas to subparagraph I is what a contingency actually is. It could be any clause, based on my reading and the other standard bits of interpretive guidance that's given elsewhere in Maryland's code. Contingency means a clause included in a contract for sale of residential real estate that requires a specific event or action to occur. It's not just limited to that list. So I guess I'm confused on the limiting piece.
Well, I mean, Matt's concern is one of the concerns we have as well, among other things.
got it. I'm going to go now to the committee. Delegate Healy had her hand up first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have actually two questions that are related to the same discussion about contingency. Until a lot of times, well, people need to be able to sell their current property in order to be able to buy another property. So they have that. That's not what you mean by financing, is it? I mean, because I recall you have people who, through no fault of their own, there's the sale of their home falls through, and so they don't have the wherewithal to buy another home until that first property is sold. That's a kind of common contingency. Is that included in this?
Typically, Delegate Healy, that would be a separate contingency, a sale of home contingency that someone would put into the contract.
And would that be covered by this bill or not?
That would be separate and apart.
Yes.
I don't
Separate and
understand
apart.
what that means. What it means separate.
It would be a different different contract, so to speak. A different set of documents to indicate that this sale is contingent upon the sale of this other house.
But and what is the situation? Are those kind of situations subject to the same kind of problem where the good faith money is held back when that happens, or is that already taken care of in the law? That's what I want to know.
I'm going to let Ms. May discuss it further, but in the contingency amendments or clauses for a sale of a separate property, all of the items in terms of the return of the escrow is in that document as well. But I'll let Ms. May expand upon that.
Yeah, I mean, the deposit could certainly be held up because of the exercise or not of that contingency. I'll tell you, those contingencies on sale of a home have not been common in the past probably 10 years, given what our real estate market has been. But it's not one of the the contingencies that we've outlined in this bill. I believe likely because that could be another one that could get a little bit tricky. Is the person accepting reasonable offers for the sale of their home, or are they really just trying to get out of this contract and using that as an out by not really accepting any reasonable offer for it?
Let me be more specific with Delegate Healy's question. Does that scenario apply to this bill?
It does not.
Well, I don't
how
think
it is
that's
written now.
Hang on a second. Ms. May, are you finished with your discussion?
I am. Thank you.
All right, I heard Delegate Healy.
Okay, thank you for that information. My other question is a similar but somewhat different. For instance, if you are buying a house and you put into the contract a contingency that's not listed here, like you want to have an architect look at it and see how extensive repairs might be needed, so that you have an idea how much additional money you might have to spend to fix up an old house. And so you say, you put the good faith money down, but that you're gonna hire it, and it's in the contract, that it's dependent on whether what the architect tells you, and then you make a judgment call about it costs too much, and I'm not gonna do that, and I want my money back, and I'm gonna buy a different house. So that's the question.
And that, I'm gonna let Ms. May hop in, or Ms. I see your initials up there. I'm gonna, when the stakeholders pop in here in a minute, but again, Delegate Healy, that is a normal contingency of a contract inspection. And that does give you an opportunity to back out of the contract, but that is a normal scenario. And that I don't believe is part of this bill either. So I'm gonna let the stakeholders pop in here to address your question, Delegate Healy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it's Susan Zuhowski. I realized that this came up, and of course, with a name like Zuhowski, I'm used to hearing Susan only. But thank you for an opportunity to address this question. Again, as we've discussed earlier, you have the one section that says contingency means, and it's any contingency in the contract. And then you have another section that says contingency includes, but including something doesn't limit it to. So perhaps if the statute just for purposes of this statute, contingency means only. I mean, right now the contract or the statute is internally inconsistent, which again is why I think that we would like to see the addition of unless otherwise agreed to in writing by the parties, and then the parties can handle it rather than having the statute handle it.
You good, Delegate Healy?
So let me just summarize and see, and Mr. Chairman, you can tell me if I'm correct in my understanding that the scenarios that I described are not covered in this list of things, but they are actually contingencies, and they would probably be in a contract. So they're not really included in that list, but they might be covered under the language of the bill because it includes an actual definition of what is a contingency. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yep. I see now Delegate Boyce has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can Matt put back up the bill in that section, please?
Absolutely. And does this need to be bigger for anybody?
If you can make it just a bit smaller. So it says what contingency means.
Mhm.
And I think that it says contingency includes a clause related to. I would prefer that we keep this language, but for me, it feels exclusive and almost seems like it should say a contingency may include, because there could be other things.
So I
don't
step in.
I don't know.
Briefly. Typically, in a situation like this, includes would be interpreted to signal a non-exhaustive list of examples. The means dictates what contingency, how it would absolutely be defined. So it is a clause included in the contract. Yeah,
okay,
that would require some specific event.
And because I'm getting a little bit lost in the back and forth, this bill has not been amended.
The Senate version of the bill passed over favorably, so you're looking at the third reader Senate version. Yes, there have not been any amendments. As was suggested earlier, there were recommended amendments. However,
was the House bill amended?
The House bill wasn't acted on. The House bill, we only had a hearing on it a couple of days before crossover, so it just ran out of time. But ultimately, could be acted on now.
Right. I would love to move this bill because it seems like we're arguing on semantics and not necessarily the bill, but that's just me.
Thank you, Delegate Boyce. Delegate Lehman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Delegate Boyce. I was going to suggest one of the following. I'd prefer to call the question. We have a motion and a second, and I just think this is really late in the game for these folks on here to be talking about amendments. It's hard to follow their logic. I feel like no, excuse me. I'm just going to say, I feel like they're throwing things at the wall and seeing what might stick. And I find this really disconcerting. I really do.
All right. Now we're going to go to,
That's not
what
true.
happened? What happened? What did I just do? Delegate Lehman, you still have the floor.
Yeah, I felt like, I wanted to finish saying, we have a motion and a second. This, I assume they tried to get amendments over on the Senate side and did not succeed, I'm guessing. This is really kind of late where we have a motion and a second on the table, and I'm not even clear what these folks are after. The last person that spoke said contingency should mean only, and then she trailed off. Should mean only what? Only what you say it means, one or two things, or what Delegate Boyce suggested, something like, means the following, but not, including but not limited to. I cannot tell what they even want. And I just think.
Delegate Lehman, how about if we do this? Let's just narrow the discussion to the words and not the persons on the screen. Just for the purpose of discussion, the words that you're having issues with. So we don't get into any personal discussions. All right. So you're concerned. So are you calling the question, Delegate Lehman?
I am calling the question.
It's been a motion and a second. Any additional discussion on Senate Bill 651? Hearing none, all in favor of Senate Bill 651, indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition to Senate Bill 651? Raise your hand, please. Seeing none, Senate Bill 651 received a favorable recommendation from the committee. Now, there's a cross file. The cross file is HB 1235. Senate Bill 12, House Bill 1235 is House Bill 1235 is the cross file of Senate Bill 651, which is Delegate Wells's bill. I would make a motion to amend House Bill 1235 to mirror Senate Bill 651. Is there a second?
So they already do.
Oh,
They're
perfect.
identical as introduced.
That makes it much easier. So it's a motion and a second for House Bill 1235. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on House Bill 1235? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Jones.
I just want to say, it's over now. You guys have voted on it, but it was a late file bill with a late hearing of which we submitted written testimony on. The flaw with electronic submission is that we did not know, this is the first time I'm hearing that you didn't see our amendments. So we're not late at the game expressing our concern with the bill. We submitted written when it was due. We submitted our amendments when it was due. It's not our fault it had a late hearing. And we are here at the Real Property Subcommittee when we had our first opportunity to express our concerns. So we're not late to the game. So you've done what you've done, and I just want to share that.
I appreciate it. Then we have a motion and a second on House Bill 1235. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of House Bill 1235, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition to House Bill 1235? Seeing none, it will receive a favorable recommendation from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. I want to go back now. We did discuss, the first bill we discussed was Senate Bill, what was the first one, Matthew? 382, was it?
No, so it was Senate Bill 194, sir.
Was there a cross file on that one?
It had already passed timely, and what the subcommittee did was recommend amending it to do what the subcommittee and the full committee had done to the House version of the bill as it had passed out of the House.
What I'm referring to, Matthew, is the accessory dwelling unit bill.
That is a bill for the Land Use and Ethics Committee or Subcommittee.
Oh, so I don't have that one.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the work for Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. And yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I missed it. If you brought it up or the agenda was amended, what happened to HB 1073? I thought we were discussing that as well.
It's on hold.
It's on hold. Okay.
Right.
Are we meeting again this week? Do we know?
We are meeting as frequently as necessary. Stand by.
Gotcha.
Keep your ears
Okay.
on.
Thank you.
All right. I will see all of you soon. Meeting adjourned.